The boat was definitely a lot quieter after the family caught their train on Saturday morning. After they left, we cruised up to Cosgrove Marina for a pump out, but they didn't have the facilities, so had to head south to Milton Keynes. We got to the new marina at 5:50, just in time to get a much needed pump out for £7. No, this chamber pot, adorned with our guest names, was not included in the pump out service. It's part of our hand-painted canalware that includes the Buckby can, the 2 flower cauldrons, table coasters, the stone hot water bottle and the flat iron. We moored up outside a pub, but it was a dull and rainy evening, so decided to stay on board, light the fire and have a nice stew for dinner. On Sunday morning we called Pat's cousin Jeff and his wife Peggy and arranged to meet them at the Three Locks pub in Salisbury at noon. It took longer than expected to get there because the fishermen were out in full force and there was a lot of traffic on the canal. That meant slow going in the open stretches as well as going through the locks. We ended up being an hour late, but Jeff and Peg were there to meet us. After a pizza lunch we went for a 2-hour cruise to Stoke Hammond before returning to Salisbury, where they said goodbye. It was another gorgeous day on Monday as we made our way to Leighton Buzzard. We didn't stop at the Globe in Linslade, but this is where we had a great meal during our 1985 cruise. Pat's cousin Rodney, who's an artist, did a very nice watercolour painting from this photo. And 18 years later, the full-size painting still has a place of honour in our house. We moored up in Leighton Buzzard right outside a Tesco store with a laundromat only a short distance away. That was very convenient. After picking up some groceries and doing a bit of laundry, we got fish and chips for supper on board. It was rock salmon and was very good and on par with Busy Lizzie's in Skipton. It was another nice sunny morning as we did the last bit of shopping at Tesco's before getting underway. By noon it had turned nasty and we managed to moor up just before it started to belt down with thunder and lightning. It was so windy there were white horses on the canal. Then all of a sudden the sun came out, the wind dropped and it turned into a beautiful afternoon as we cruised to just after Slapton Lock. On the way we stopped to replenish our supplies of blackberries. On Wednesday the 6th we had visitors from Arizona. It was Chet, the husband of Pat's niece Eileen, and his parents Bill and Daphne. We had lunch at the Carpenter's Arms in Slapton, and to this day the steak and kidney pie ranks as one of the best we've ever had. It was homemade and the portions were so large that Pat and I split a meal and had no room left for dessert. It was served with all sorts of veggies and potatoes in individual tureens. While we were having lunch, their rental car was broken into. The vandals smashed a window and stole an ice bag. After calling the rental company to report the incident, Pat, Chet and I returned to the boat and Bill and Daphne took off to go back to Luton. Chet stayed with us for the night and we cruised a couple of miles and went through 5 locks to Ivinghoe. We had supper on board and in the evening Chet told us the sad news that he and Eileen were separating after 22 years of marriage. The next morning Bill and Daphne arrived to pick up Chet and we had lunch at the Duke of Wellington before they took off. This lunch was nowhere near as good as yesterday's. It was a sunny afternoon, but we decided to stay put and relaxed reading books and painting canalware. As usual, it started to pour down in the evening. It was another nice sunny morning on Friday as we left Ivanhoe for Cowroast Marina. We hadn't had any responses to our ad in Waterways World to sell Claire Justine for £40,000, so we wanted to talk to them about selling her after we returned to the States in November. After checking the boat out, the broker, Paul, said he'd list her, but for no more than £35,000. We were not interested. However, he was nice enough to let us leave the boat moored in the marina while we spent the night at Jeff and Peg's place in Dunstable. We spent a nice evening chatting with them and spent some time with Pat's Aunt Ida. The next morning Jeff drove us back to the boat. We only cruised for a few minutes and moored up no more than half a mile from the marina near Bridge 136. We spent most of the day polishing, cleaning and of course painting. We did give some thought to continuing down the Grand Union into London, but as the weather was so lousy, we decided against it. However, at Marsworth Junction we did decide to cruise up the Aylesbury arm. It turned into a nice day as we cruised 6 miles and 16 locks through the beautiful countryside showing off its autumn colours. There was also lots of blackberries just waiting to be picked. The Aylesbury Arm is isolated and is one of the most peaceful stretches of canal in the country. It passes through modest farmlands with views of the Chiltern Hills to the east. All the locks on the Grand Union are double wide, but the 16 on the arm are narrow locks. Because of all the heavy rain that we were having, the water was rushing over the top gates and they were pretty tough to open. You definitely had to stay as far forward as possible. We got to Aylesbury around 6 o'clock just before sunset. The nights were sure drawing in now. The duck that the town is famous for, the white domesticated Aylesbury duck, is no longer to be found, but there was a good selection of other breeds in the basin. During the night we kept hearing this tap 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 on the side of the boat as they picked away at the weed on our hull. Once again it was a bright sunny morning on Monday as we looked around town and picked up some groceries at Sainsbury's. We left around 10:30 and started making our way up the arm. It's difficult to make out in this photo, but there are all sorts of ornate chimneys decorating this garden. It took us about 4 hours to make it back to Marsworth Junction, where we retraced our journey back up the Grand Union to just beyond the Seabrook Locks. We moored up by Ivanhoe Bridge and spent the rest of the afternoon priming and touching up the hull below the gunwale. Guess what? It started to rain and then it poured down all night. But we had a cosy evening by a nice warm fire. What a night! It belted down and continued rain, rain, rain all day. I read while Pat worked on the Butby can. By the way, it's nearly finished and it's looking good. The weather still looked unsettled around 4:30, but we decided to push on up the Grove. Things didn't look much better on Wednesday and I was beginning to get a bit concerned. It was becoming more and more difficult to know where the canal was, and British Waterways personnel were telling boaters to moor up because it wasn't possible to go through the locks. The next couple of shots will give you some idea of what it was like. Between Grove and Leighton Buzzard, the River Ouse and the canal were becoming one waterway. The water was flowing fast and it was very windy, not pleasant cruising weather. I was most likely down below, sitting by a nice warm fire having a wee droppy while Pet was doing all the steering. We did eventually make it to Leighton Buzzard and arrived just as it was getting dark. I think it may have been the Smugglers Pub by Bridge 144 where we had dinner and watched England get beaten by Holland on TV. We spent all of Thursday at the same mooring, did some laundry, got some groceries at Tesco's, and I continued to work on the hull below the gunwale. We also painted the mop handle to match the Butby can. Do you remember the rock salmon supper a few days ago? Well, we returned to the same shop and once again it was delicious. After supper we had a quiet evening by the fire listening to the radio. On Friday we cruised 14 miles and 6 locks up to Great Linford. We moored up here in 1985 when we were cruising with Len and Olive and my half-brother Malcolm and his wife Carol. Great Linford is well worth stopping to visit. The historic village is just a few yards from the canal and includes the Church of St Andrews, which was dedicated in 1215, as well as the 17th century manor house that's now a recording studio, and some very pretty almshouses. Okay, what am I doing here? Well, I'm reenacting what happened in 1985. Len tossed the boat keys at Olive, knowing she'd miss them and that they'd end up in the canal. He thought they'd float because they were attached to a large cork ball. Well, he was wrong. They sank to the bottom of the canal. Malcolm finally volunteered to retrieve them by going for a dip in the ice-cold water. On Saturday we cruised past Wolvercote railway station where we'd said goodbye to the family 2 weeks ago. We ended up at Cosgrove Aqueduct. It got so cold in the night that Pat went to bed with a hot water bottle, and I even turned up the oldie heater. Up to now we'd stoke up the solid fuel stove and that'd keep us warm until the morning. Well, I think the cold night put an end to our flower garden. The cold front did move through and I was able to finish the paint job on the hull. Claire Justine looks just like she did when we met her at Brighouse. There were a lot of people walking along the towpath and a number of them stopped to say how nice she looked. In the afternoon we went through Cosgrove Lock very carefully, making sure we didn't scratch any of that new paint job. We tied off at the Navigation pub in Castlethorpe to await the arrival of our guests. It was Olive and Len returning for their 4th visit. Actually, it was Len's 5th visit. We went over to the Navigation for dinner and then caught up on their news before turning in for the night. We had a nice leisurely breakfast and took off around 11 AM. We stopped at a boatyard to pick up an oil filter in preparation for the next oil change. It was a gorgeous day, blue skies and beautiful countryside, and Stoke Bruin locks were a perfect setting to take a few photographs. After going through all 7 Stoke Bruin locks, we moored up just before Blisworth Tunnel. We did find out that we had a lot of water under the subflooring, and we eventually bailed out 7 buckets. It may have been the result of overfilling the water tank at Leighton Buzzard. Well, I had dinner on board and spent the evening playing Liverpool. On Tuesday morning, Len walked into town to get a couple of pints of milk before taking us through the tunnel. I promise, these are the last of the tunnel shots. As I mentioned before, this 3,057 yard long tunnel was the longest one open to navigation in 1993. It was another lovely day as we cruised up to Bugbrook. Pat and Olive walked into town to get some groceries and then we just relaxed on board. In the evening we continued our Liverpool tournament. It's Wednesday the 20th of October and Len is up early jollying up the fire so the lounge will be nice and toasty for breakfast. From the looks of what's on his head, I think there's going to be some kind of celebration today. Happy birthday to me. Look, a birthday cake with marzipan and icing. We had cake and trifle for breakfast. And I had lots of birthday presents.